I received some questions about how I prepare my automations. I have a workflow for that which I think is very beneficial for everyone who's starting out in automation. Because if you would start automating right inside of n8n, you're confronted with a lot of issues and complexities, which in the end unnecessarily overcomplicate your automation. I have been working in automation for a very long time. And what I have found, if you just write down your automation before you actually build it, it will save you so much time, it will save you so much stress, and it actually enables you to communicate with everyone in your team what you actually try to achieve with the automation, because for many people automation is difficult to grasp. So I'll teach you my way of working. I will not say that my way of working is the best. It's just something that I've seen in my daily life as an entrepreneur in AI that it works very well, but feel free to take your own interpretations. But let's dive straight into it. When I map out processes, I always signify the start and the end of a process with a circle. Today I will try to make an invoice generator and a quote maker, because I do have a lot of projects coming up and making a quote is always a little bit unnecessary for me, especially because I do use a lot of AI in the process. So let's write it down in text first. Then you can just jot down some of the functionalities that would make this automation a successful project for you. So that is the necessary to have. So it should look good. So this is very good for a basic version. And then the nice to haves, and you should put them apart, and I'll explain why that's necessary later. So I have a Stripe account, and what would be so handy if I can make a quote, and then underneath the quote you have the buy button instantly. You just want to remove as many barricades between you and your clients actually buying something. I have found that they really appreciate that. So I'm not going to build all of these functionalities now, but just writing it down helps you to clear up your mind, because if you don't write this down and you start automating right from n8n, you will find yourself thinking, oh, what if I add this? What if I add this? And then you start overcomplicating your workflow while you didn't even get the basis yet. So if you write it down here and you finalize the initial version, which already saves you a lot of time, then part by part you can start implementing the nice to have. Because what I've seen is a lot of n8n burnout, because you have so much creativity, everything is possible. You just get overwhelmed and you just quit the project entirely, and that's what you want to prevent. So I wanted to stay online for 14 days, and if you visit the page after that, you have to quote again, just to make sure that someone cannot accept a quote like months later. So this is my ideal quoting system. So that means that I can just take my phone, I'll just talk to my Telegram assistant and say, hey, I have this new client and I want you to generate a quote. Maybe it can also research the prospect. See, with writing down, you are just reciting your automation again, and then the ideas start coming and coming and coming, and it just helps so much to decide what is the MVP. MVP is a minimum viable product. You really need to focus on that, because if you have the minimum ready, you can always expand on it, but focusing on a very big and complex automation at first will not be good for anyone. We're gonna focus on the top part. Okay, so I want a quote to be generated from a Telegram voice memo. So the start of the process. Alright, so the process starts with a Telegram voice or text. And then the next step, yeah, it will transcribe, just save. So this makes sure that you can reuse the text or the voice in the whole automation. So what we'll do next is create an agent, and it has a different shape, and I try to stick to. So the next step is that you connect it with an agent, and then you can say analyze the request and make a proposal. Obviously, this agent needs some tools. So the first tool I'm going to connect, of course, is, I think I'm going to go for, no, I'm not for Google, I'm going to go for GPT-5. Because it's very important that it's written carefully. Also make sure to have an internet browse functionality, which is actually included into GPT now. So I'm just going to write it down like this, so it is more clear. And also the tone of voice is now connected to ChatGPT, so we can make sure it's already embedded there, so we can avoid using a RAG system. Yeah, so. Okay, so this agent is having a good set of brains, and we also need an output formatter. This one will make sure that instead of just, for example, in Google, if you would send one prompt, you will get one prompt back. But if you're going to generate a quote, I want this agent to export the email. I want it to export, I'm going to write it down just to make it easier to understand. Because it doesn't matter if this looks messy. The thing that's important in that is that you can get what is in your mind, your vision on the board. Just like, for example, I was teaching a while ago about this, and maybe you remember sometimes you have some issues in your life and you're struggling with something, which is very normal, everybody has that. And you just write down everything you can think about the situation. And when you look down on it, you just realize, okay, this is less intimidating than I thought at first. And that's the magic of just writing it down. So please don't worry about making it look good. It is just for you, so you get some clarity when you're working. So I'll just say, I want this agent to not only respond with, yes, of course, I can help you. This is a quote and this is the email. No, I want it to output multiple different sets of data. Quote title, work description, summary. Yeah, it's like a summary. You have the detailed contents of the quote. So when you open a quote, you have a big title, a work description, which is a short intro. Then you have detailed content where you write everything out. Pricing part. To begin, we don't need to have the email there. I'm going to do it in a different way. I'm going to write down current challenge. How will this also match my tone of voice? I'm from the Netherlands. I'm straight to business. You know, you have a problem, I'll solve it. And it costs so many schmeckles. I don't want to make it sound better than it is. It's just a solution. So the end of the process will always be a circle. This is how I learned it in school. Feel free to choose whatever shape you like. Well, we're obviously not going to respond in Telegram. The final step, at least, should be to send. Do I want this automation to send the quote yet for the first version? Nah, just make the quote. This is good for the first version. Alright, so now we have a vision of the beginning and the end of the process, but we're not quite there yet. I also want to make sure that we connect a proper database to this automation. So I'm just going to take this one, and I always like to give my databases a color, and why. I'll show you now. So for example, the original message, I want it to save this to the database. So this database is my quote database. Alright, so when the agent is done finalizing and making a proposal, of course, I wanted to save it to the same database again. But also, if I later in my process use another database, for example, a CRM with already existing clients, I can give it a red color. So when I finalize the quote, and for example, the client accepts later, they will end up in the CRM. That would be another process. I'll just write it down very quickly. That would start a new process. And when a quote is accepted, then I will have an agent to generate the information about the client. And then it's going to be saved to the CRM. But then later in another automation, I have to do something with the quote database. I can reference it later, and just in the color, when you squint your eyes, you can see which data is going where easily. Telegram, I will tell Telegram to take a message. It will generate a proposal. Alright, so when I look at this, I want to have an extra step. I want to be able to send quote. Do I want it in my Telegram or do I prefer to have the quote in my email? I can think about that still. I don't have to make that choice right now. I'm going to send the quote to any given media for me to approve because I want to keep the human in the loop. Because of course I'm not going to send out quotes and not check it beforehand. So then the automation looks like this. But there's a choice to be made. And when there's a choice to be made, there's a different shape we use. And that's called a diamond, or how we call it from my studies back in the days, an OR gate. So we used to write it down like this. If you send a quote for approval, there are multiple outputs. If the output is accepted, the quote is okay, you can finalize it, the process is done. But there's also another outcome. The outcome could also be not accepted, adjust. So if the prompt is not accepted, you can adjust it through Telegram. So in that case, if I just say, no, I want to adjust this quote, I can, for example, receive a message like, okay, what do you want to adjust? So for example, I receive a quote for a beauty business and they want to have an automation, and the quote generator made a quote for 2,000 euros. That's obviously too less. So with a very simple quote, I can say, hey, this has to be adjusted and take this information. And then I can take that information back to the agent. Of course, this does not look very well. Sometimes you have to think a little bit about that. I also always try to keep my hygiene of my projects very high because it's made to have oversight, not to confuse you. Let's do it like this. So let's create a little bit of extra space here. Well, look at that. All right, so prompt for adjustment. In this agent, you will also make a field. If prompt for adjustment exists, then with an expression, you can say, make sure to adjust the quote. And it can also take the quote that has been generated because you can carry that data right over here back into the agent. So you can say, but of course we also have another option, and that is if you don't want to adjust the quote and just cancel the process, that's also an option. And then the process stops there. Alright, what we'll do now is make this even easier to have an oversight in. So I always try to align everything as best as I can. So let's put this one there. Try to make it all. I always try to make it look very easy to understand. So then we're going to add a part, and this is named data in. This is where the process starts, so where the process is unfinished. And then later on, the process always ends in data out. And you make this part green because obviously that's what the finished process looked like. So as you can see, it is now very simple to helicopter over the entire system. You can even take it a little bit further because I would say that this agent is a little bit complex, which is okay. But there are some extra steps we can take to make it even more easy to understand and communicate with larger teams. Because this is one environment. So what I would do is select this environment and say agent. And I'll make this white because that looks better. So this database is obviously outside of this quotation agent. as you can see, if you take steps like this, it is so much easier to just helicopter over the functionality of this agent. Alright, so we'll call this quotation agent V1 MVP. Alright, we now have made the outline of the MVP. This is everything that's written there. When you have built this, you can just copy and paste this one. You have found some lessons from what you've built here in n8n, and then you can take it on and maybe even improve what you have written down in the nice to haves. What's very important here, please don't focus on making nice to haves while you're building this. This is really important because I've seen so many projects stop. Focus on finishing it, this first, and then you can start by expanding automation per automation. So I hope this helps, and good luck flowgramming.